Happy New Year, Zag fans. It's 2025, and we take a look at some New Year's resolutions for this Gonzaga basketball team.
You are Locked On Zags, your daily podcast on the Gonzaga Bulldogs. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, folks? Happy Wednesday. Happy 2025. And welcome into the Locked On Zags podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I am your host and longtime Gonzaga podcaster, Andy Patton, here to bring you news and updates on all things Zag athletics. Today's episode of Locked On Zags is brought to you by Game Time. Folks, download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege, and you'll get $20 off your first purchase. Well, when the calendar flipped from 2023 to 2024, that's when Gonzaga finally kind of righted the ship after a not so great start to the season last year. Of course, they still had that loss to Santa Clara, but otherwise, really strong finish to the season. We're hoping to see some of the same from this year's Gonzaga team that once again had a very rough month of December, culminating in a very ugly second half against Pepperdine on Monday. So we're going to talk about not only why we're hoping to see this from Gonzaga moving forward, but what specifically we want to see. We're going to go player by player through the roster for the players in the rotation. We're also going to talk about some resolutions for Coach Few for some of the players on the bench who are not playing as much. We're also going to close out the show with some resolutions on the women's basketball side of things as well. So we're just going to go through the four guards here in the first segment, the four front court players in the second segment, giving each of them a New Year's resolution, something to focus on that we would like to see them improve on, work on, have go more in their direction positively for the rest of the season. We'll start with the guards. We'll start with the straw that stirs the drink, the point guard, Ryan Nembhard. Main thing we want to see from Nembhard from a resolution perspective, be more welcoming of the pressure. Thrive in the pressure. Because there are a lot of very, very good things we can say about Ryan Nembhard. The three-point shooting has improved. The facilitation skills are top-notch. He's elite in the pick and roll. Again, the shooting has improved. The free throw shooting for a overall percentage has improved. The turnovers have come down. I know the last few games have been more concerning in that area. But one of the biggest flaws that we've seen from Ryan Nembhard, not just this season, but last year as well, is kind of an inability to contribute in crunch time. He doesn't provide the offense, at least not the scoring punch. And he's never been a score-first guard, but he's not providing that offensive punch needed to help close out games. It's kind of an issue for Gonzaga's entire roster is not having a closer. They don't have a Jalen Suggs type, a guy who can just go get you a basket when you desperately need a basket. And Ryan Nembhard shouldn't be in that role. And I think that we'll talk about that more when we get to Mark Few's resolutions of maybe switching some things up in terms of what are being asked of certain players in certain situations. But at the end of the day, you should trust your point guard to be at the free throw line in late game situations. And last year against Santa Clara, Ryan Nembhard kind of cost them the game with the missed free throw. He unquestionably cost him an opportunity to win the game against UCLA with the missed free throw. He missed a free throw late in the game against Pepperdine. That's 3 games recently, or 2 games recently, 3 this year, where free throw shooting, which has been a strength of his, was not able to be successful in that spot in a situation where Gonzaga really needed him to. He obviously did not have a good last possession against UCLA. So it's an area where for a player who's so calm and cool and collected, who has so much pedigree, who's a senior, whose brother's in the NBA, like you would really expect crunch time and clutch situations to kind of be an area of strength for Nembhard. And it's not. I mean, I think point blank, it's not. And randomly becoming good in clutch situations is not an easy thing to do. So part of this resolution is hoping that Nembhard either recognizes that and is better at distributing the ball in that situation, or finding that confidence, working through whatever it is to be more confident in his abilities in clutch time. Because if the Zags are going to want to rely on him, and even if they're relying on Battle or Hickman or somebody else to score, Nembhard's still going to play a valuable role at the end of the game. He's going to have the basketball pretty much every possession at the end of games in close situations, provided he's not on the bench. So that's an area that I'd like to see him improve. For Hickman, moving on here, put more pressure on the rim. Nolan Hickman has taken 4 free throws this year. He's made all 4 of them. Hooray. 4 of 4 from the free throw line for your starting two guard, one of your player expected to be one of your leading scorers, who is one of your leading scorers right now. It's just not good enough. And I understand that his role is not to be constantly driving to the basket. I'm not saying his role should change dramatically. If there's a player we want driving more to the basket on this roster, it's not Nolan Hickman. It's the player we're going to talk about next, Khalif Battle. But for Hickman, I mean, he's averaging just under 3 2-point attempts per game. That's the lowest of his career since his freshman season when he played 17 minutes. He's playing over 30 minutes a game this year. To put it into perspective, since his role has changed throughout his career, last year and this year is the first time Nolan Hickman's had basically the same role asked of him from the coaching staff. I'm sure there have been adjustments, but by and large, he's being asked to do the same thing this year as he was last year. Last year, Nolan Hickman shot 41.3% from 3 points on 5.4 attempts per game. This year, Nolan Hickman is shooting 44% from 3 on 4.9 attempts per game. So basically the same number of attempts, slightly better percentage. Last year, Nolan Hickman shot 53% on 2-pointers while attempting 5.5 2-pointers per game. This year, Nolan Hickman shooting 53.7%. So again, basically exactly the same on 2-pointers. But last year he took 5.5 per game. This year he's taking 3. Sure, Gonzaga added Khalif Battle and Mike Ajayi to a team that only lost Anton Watson, and in theory, that should mean a few less shots to go around, but that's a pretty dramatic drop for a player who has throughout his career been an efficient scorer on 2-pointers. I don't think Nolan Hickman's going to ever be a Khalif Battle type where he's constantly dropping his shoulder, drawing contact and getting to the line. That's not his game. It's never been his game. His game when driving is that little floater, which is a shot designed to avoid contact and avoid getting to the free throw line. But Gonzaga's shot diet right now is way too predicated on the bigs, on Ike, on Huff, and just getting them the ball and letting them go to work and running around the perimeter and shooting threes if they can't. And with the 3-point shooting not being a strength for this team, they need more players who are willing to go to the rim. And Nolan Hickman has proven to be pretty good at that in his career. And I just don't like having a player go through an entire non-conference slate who is as valuable to this team offensively as Hickman is, who's only taken 4 free throws. That's just not enough for him at this point in the season. Moving on to Khalif Battle. I kind of wanted to do the same one, but I didn't want to be redundant. So I decided to focus Battle's resolution on the defensive end of the floor. And it's quite literally to stay grounded. And again, I mean that literally, not from a Zen or meditation perspective, but from a stop falling for pump fakes perspective. Khalif Battle falling for a pump fake very arguably cost Gonzaga the game against UCLA. I don't know if Gonzaga wins that game against UCLA with Khalif Battle, but I know they got a much better chance. They got a much better chance against a team that commits a bunch of fouls. Not having Gonzaga's best foul merchant on the floor for the entire second half in a 3-point game pretty likely was a significant factor for Gonzaga not winning that game. Battle has taken himself out of multiple games this year because of foul trouble. Not only did he get ejected in the UCLA game, which we can argue, and we did argue, that elevating that to a flagrant 2 and an ejection was kind of a BS call. I think that's a fair thing to say, but you cannot put yourself in a position for the referees to make that call. You don't fall for that pump fake, we're having a very different conversation about that game. Battle also only played 13 minutes against Nicholls State. Gonzaga didn't need him in that game. They won by 20-plus points, but he had 3 fouls and played 13 minutes in a game against a subpar opponent. You need to be able to stay on the floor. And for Battle getting in foul trouble, he's an emotional guy, and I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I think Gonzaga needs more emotion. I think Graham Ike and Khalif Battle being those emotional, strong, yelling, intense guys really helps this team. But it's also a problem for both of them in terms of being able to stay on the floor because of the fouls that they commit. For Dusty Stromer, again, back to the offensive side, if we want Hickman to shoot more 2s, we want Dusty to shoot more 3s. That's a pretty simple one. Stromer shooting 40.5% from 3 this year on 2.6 attempts per game. Last year, as a true freshman thrust into a bigger role than anticipated, Stromer took 2.7 3-point attempts per game, despite shooting 35.8%. So he's improved significantly as a 3-point shooter and is taking the exact same amount of 3s per game. He needs to take more. He needs to shoot more. There's no reason for Dusty to be shooting less per game this season than last year. He's an improved offensive player. It is clear when watching him this year, he looks more confident. He looks more ready when the ball's in his hands. He looks more comfortable shooting the rock. He needs to be taking more shots. Dusty's also shooting over 52% on two-pointers, which is pretty darn good for a guard and much improved from the 40% he shot on two-pointers last year. Last year, he only took 1.3 two-point attempts per game. This year, he's only up to 1.5. Dusty needs to be more involved in the offense. And there is a caveat here, and I mentioned it in the episode recapping the Pepperdine game. Dusty's role in that game, the reason he played pretty much the entire second half, was to be right in Mo Odom's grill. And you could argue whether it worked or not. Mo Odom obviously had an incredible half, but if you watched the game, Dusty was in his face pretty much the entire second half. And so when you're expending that much energy defensively, it's hard to go out and be a focal point offensively. So I think context matters with the conversation surrounding Dusty Stromer offensively. But at the end of the day, this team is struggling to shoot the ball from three. This team is often stagnating offensively if if Ike and or Nembhard are not playing at their best. They need somebody to go to, and I think Dusty is a better option and is not getting as much opportunity to showcase that as I believe that he should. And I think some of that falls on the coaching staff, and some of that falls on him to just go hunt his own shot and be more aggressive with the ball in his hands. We're going to move on to the front court. We know Graham Ike has an issue getting in foul trouble. That has been discussed this year. Speaking of things that have been discussed frequently, Michael Ajayi just has not found his place yet on this roster. We're going to talk about the resolutions for the two of them, as well as Ben Gregg and Braden Huff, coming up here in just a second. But first, folks, the conference portion of the college basketball season, it is here, and there's nothing better than the atmosphere of conference matchups. The anticipation of what's about to happen, the energy of the crowd, the unexpected coming to life, Zombie Nation blaring through the loudspeakers, and more. And now Game Time, folks, they have a new feature called Game Time Picks that makes getting tickets to see your favorite teams play live even easier. Game Time Picks filters out the fluff to show you only incredible deals on great seats so that you don't have to waste your time searching through thousands of different tickets. And it's not just for basketball. You can get tickets to concerts, to comedy shows, to theater, to other sports as well. So whether it's Game Time's ticketing coverage, the lowest price guarantee, or the panoramic views from your seat in the app feature, Game Time has you covered. And there's not a ton of tickets available, but if you're in Spokane and you don't get many opportunities to see the Zags play live, they are hosting Portland at the Spokane Arena on Thursday. If you're still wanting to make it out to that game, you can get 2 tickets in section 221 for just $80 a piece. So take the guesswork out of buying tickets by using Game Time. Download the Game Time app now, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege, and you will get $20 off your first purchase. Again, create an account, redeem code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off. Terms do apply. Download the Game Time app today. Last-minute tickets, lowest prices, guaranteed. All right, folks, segment 2, still Andy Patton, still Locked On Zags podcast. We're still kicking off 2025, looking at some New Year's resolutions for the rotation members of the Gonzaga basketball team, coming off a pretty terrible month of December. 3 losses, all winnable games, 18-point lead against Kentucky thrown away in the second half. The devastating loss to UConn where they won for 34 or 37 or so of the 40 minutes, but just did not play well at the start of the halves. And then, of course, the devastating loss to UCLA and the near loss to Pepperdine. You all don't need a recap. You were there. You watched some of these terrible, horrible, ugly basketball games this month. So what can change? What needs to change? What will change? We talked about what we want to see different from each of the 4 guards in Gonzaga's rotation in the first segment. Now we're going to take a look at the bigs. We're going to start with the big fella in the middle, Graham Ike, who deserves a ton of credit for how he has played lately. Graham Ike has been the most discussed player on this Gonzaga roster this season because he flat out did not look good early in the year. He had a great second half against San Diego State, and we kind of said, okay, we're waiting for it to become more consistent. And then he had an incredible first half against Kentucky, and then he didn't play well in the second half of that game. He didn't play well against UConn. We've just seen him be really inconsistent, but the last few games have really, really been that vintage Graham Ike that we desperately needed to see on this team for the second half of the year. However, Graham still needs to work on his discipline, particularly on the defensive end of the floor, although it permeates every aspect of his game. Graham Ike is a highly emotional, intense player, and I think that serves him well for the most part. But he commits stupid fouls. I believe it was Peter Woodburn on Blue Sky who said that he thinks Graham Ike picks up his second foul faster than anybody in the nation. And I don't know if there's anywhere that tracks that kind of data, but it is very noticeable. If you watch Gonzaga basketball and you watch Graham Ike, he picks up that second foul so fast and forces Mark Fewhan, even in the Pepperdine game, where both Graham Ike and Braden Huff played great. Graham Ike subbed back into the game and immediately picked up his second foul. Braden Huff had to come in after only sitting for like a minute. And Braden, to his credit, played phenomenal when that happened. But you cannot put yourself in a position where you're forced to sit on the bench. You're forcing players to play when they're fatigued and tired because you can't stay out of foul trouble. It was an issue last year. It's been an issue throughout his career. It's an issue this year. He's averaging 3 fouls per game and he's playing 20 minutes. He's averaging almost exactly 6 fouls per 40 minutes. He cannot stay on the floor. Graham also has turnover issues, and I think part of that is discipline. He panics when the double team shows up. He makes bad decisions with the basketball. And look, he is not the only problem with turnovers on this team. Mike Ajayi has a significant turnover problem. And bigs, high usage bigs, the way that Gonzaga uses Graham Ike, the way they use Drew Timme, the way going back and forth, Filip Petrusev, Domantas Sabonis, Shemak Karnowski, et cetera, they're going to get high turnover numbers because they have the ball in their hands a ton. So I don't think Graham Ike's overall turnover numbers this season are egregiously bad. Drew Timme averaged more turnovers per game basically every season than Graham. Granted, Drew played 30-plus minutes a night. Graham is playing 20, so that is a difference. But for Graham, taking better care of the ball, staying disciplined, playing within himself, not letting emotion take over, will help him stay on the floor a little bit longer and continue to be that. If he's playing 25 minutes a night and playing this good, that is great news for Gonzaga. But right now, you just don't know whether you're going to get a 25.10 rebound game from Graham Ike or whether he's going to sit the last 17 minutes of the first half because he picks up 2 early fouls. Well, when he does do that, Braden Huff is the beneficiary playing time-wise. And for Braden Huff, looking at his resolution, got to get a little tougher. Got to get a little tougher, a little bit more physical, a little bit stronger. It was something we wanted to see him improve upon from last year to this year, and he has. There's just still room to grow. I mentioned this on a show last week. It's such a startling difference between Graham Ike and Braden Huff. It's very easy to compare their stats this year because they're both playing almost exactly 20 minutes per game. So when you see significant anomalies in their stats, it's kind of worth exploring what that is coming from, what it means for Gonzaga. And one of the biggest differences between these two players right now is how much more often Graham Ike gets to the free throw line than Braden Huff. Ike is averaging 10.6 free throws per 40 minutes, free throw attempts per 40 minutes. Braden Huff, 2 free throw attempts per 40 minutes right now for Braden Huff. To me, there's a couple of reasons for this. One, I think Graham draws fouls on bigs before he comes out of the game, and then those bigs are less aggressive defensively against Braden, which allows him to shoot really well from the field. I think that is a part of it. I also think a big part of it is that Braden tends to shy away from contact, whereas Graham leans more into it. It leads to Graham missing more shots, because he takes more contested twos. He's more likely to get his shot blocked or to get his shot altered by a defender if he's going into them, whereas Braden's more likely to fall away. He's got that little jump hook where he's kind of falling away from the basket. He's got that little bit step back kind of fadeaway shot. And Braden's an exceptional offensive player. The fact that he makes those shots as consistently as he does is tremendous. But for Braden, seeing him be a bit more aggressive, maybe some more pump fakes on the jump shot, ducking under, trying to draw contact, getting to the free throw line, I think that would help him. It would help put the opposing team in foul trouble. There's just some benefit to that we haven't really seen Huff lean into yet in his career. Beyond that, Braden Huff's not a great rebounder. Graham's a better rebounder. Ben's a better rebounder. Michael is a better rebounder. Braden doesn't get a ton of offensive rebounds. Part of that is because he doesn't miss as many shots. A lot of Graham's offensive rebounds are on shots that he missed. Again, going back to leaning into defenders, missing at the rim, grabbing it, ducking under, getting another attempt. Huff just makes his shots, so he doesn't get as many chances to do that, but it's still a dramatic difference. Per 40 minutes, right now, Graham Ike is averaging 13.8 boards. Greg's averaging 10.4. Ajayi is averaging 9.6. Braden's down at 8.8. He's the tallest player out of this group and is averaging the least amount of rebounds. Some of it is because he plays a little farther away from the rim, but not really. I think it's just a bit of a physicality thing, a bit of a strength thing. It hurts him defensively as well. He doesn't hedge the screens quite as intensely, as physically as Graham Ike does. Graham certainly picks up more fouls than Braden, and that is a product of him being more physical and more tougher, rougher defensively than Braden Huff. And obviously Graham picking up more fouls is not a good thing, but Braden doesn't pick up fouls because he's not aggressive enough. Frankly, that's part of the problem. And players score over Braden more easily than they score over Graham. Neither of them are great defensive players, particularly not in space. But Braden, because he doesn't play a super physical brand of basketball, may be better at avoiding fouls, but it doesn't put up as good of a contest against a lot of shots at the rim as well. For Ben Gregg, the main thing we want to see here from a resolution is kind of outside of his control to an extent. We want to see some regression to the mean. And what I mean by that is that everything that we've seen from Ben Gregg this year, statistically, from the eye test, pretty much the same. He is pretty much the same player that he has always been in a Gonzaga uniform, except for one thing. The three-point shot is just gone. It's just not there at all. This year, he is taking 2.3 3-point attempts per game. He's making them under 19% of the time. Greg shot exactly 37.7% each of the past two seasons. Both 1.7 3-point attempts per game as a sophomore, and 3-point attempts per game as a junior. So you average those two out. It's about 2.5 attempts per game. This year, he's about 2.5 attempts per game, and he's half. His percentage is half. You just got to hope that starts to regress back to where he typically has been throughout his college basketball career. Everything else Ben's doing is great. He's getting offensive rebounds at a super high clip. His finishing around the rim, he's shooting just under 70% on two-pointers, one of the highest marks of his career, leading the WCC in two-point field goal percentage. He's shooting more free throws than he's ever shot in his career, 3.8 per game. His free throw percentage is the highest of his career. Everything he is doing is the same or better. He is still hard-nosed defensively. He is still diving for loose balls. He is still a cerebral player with the ball in his hands, knows how to make the right pass, knows what to do with the ball, to the point where I don't think he's taken a lot of bad threes. If he was taking bad shots, we'd be having a different conversation. Greg is doing everything he's expected to do, taking good looks from three like he's supposed to do in this offense. And so far through the first 14 games of the season, they just haven't gone down. I expect that'll change. And I expect that'll change because we have 4 years of data about Ben Gregg, and because we're watching the games, he's not taking bad threes. I think we'll see him shoot 40% from three in the second half of the season. I think that's what we need from him to help this team turn around, and I think that we're going to get it. Last but not least, Michael Ajayi, what we want to see from him from a resolution perspective, be more confident. Michael Ajayi is way too far in his own head right now. I think it's so clear, especially after watching the Pepperdine game, not just from the actual performance on the floor and the stats, but the body language. This is a man who is pressing right now. He knows he's not delivering where he wants to deliver. He knows he's not playing at the level he is capable of playing at. He knows that he is not helping this team win games at a rate that he knows he's capable of doing, that the coaches expect from him, that his teammates expect from him. He knows all of this. You can tell. If you watch the game on Monday against Pepperdine, he started the second half and basically turned the ball over twice in a row and came out and didn't come back in the game. Part of that was because he just looked really lost. He didn't play well in the first half. He probably would have got a longer leash if he had. But in the second half, his first pass was attempting to make an entry pass to Graham Ike when Graham was very clearly coming up to set a screen for him. Just a miscommunication, just something we've seen from Michael this year where it seems like he is so keyed into what he's supposed to do that he's not just playing with any kind of feel. You need to be able to play with feel in Gonzaga's offense. You need to be able to play with feel in any offense. You just need to have it. I think Michael has it, but he's so afraid of not doing the right thing in this system that he's kind of abandoning it. His second turnover was a set play where Ryan swings the ball to the big man at the top of the key. The big always looks to make an entry pass and then turns to swing it the other direction. For some reason, Michael tried to swing it back to Ryan, who, after Ryan made the pass, he went to set a screen for Dusty to come back around, something that Gonzaga's done in their offense for as long as I've been watching them. Not a difficult play, not a unusual set for Gonzaga to run. And Michael just turned and threw the ball straight out of bounds while Ryan was moving the other direction. And that was when you saw him throw his hands on the ground and just look exasperated and frustrated. And I think that's where so much of Michael's struggles this year have been internal, have been in his head. I don't always like diagnosing like mental struggles for players from the couch. It just feels wrong. We're not there. We're not at practices. We're not hearing everything that's happening. But when Michael is playing without thinking, to which I mean when he's playing one-on-one defense, where there's not a lot he has to think about other than guarding this man in front of him, when he is boxing out, when he is going for loose balls, when he is in transition, things that don't require a lot of thought or a lot of research ahead of time, like in terms of knowing the offense, he looks really good. But when he is pressing is when he is trying to run set offensive plays, when he is trying to play team defense. Young man just needs to get more confident in himself. I'm hoping the staff can find a way to get that out of him and he can have a dominant second half to the season, because I know the talent is there, but the performance on the court has not been anywhere close to what we need it to be for this team to be a Final Four national championship contender. Well, we're going to close out the show talking about a resolution for Coach Mark Few, as well as some of Gonzaga's reserves on the roster and a resolution for the women's basketball team. All that coming up in just a second. But first, folks, get ready to tackle the college hoops action this season with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Because right now, new customers can bet $5 and you will get $150 in bonus bets if you win. The FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need to place live bets all in one place. So when you get a hunch in the middle of a game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more, all on the same page where you place your bets. Little New Year's Day hoops action. UConn going on the road to take on DePaul in conference play. Probably a little surprising to see the Huskies only as 10.5-point favorites against a historically Big East bottom feeder. I do like this DePaul team. I like Coach Chris Holtmann and what they're doing, but give me UConn covering the spread there, winning by 15 plus. If you like those odds or any of the other odds on FanDuel right now, just visit FanDuel.com to join today. As a reminder, you'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win that first $5 bet. That's FanDuel.com, America's #1 sportsbook. All right, folks, closing out the show, continuing our New Year's resolution episode here of Locked On Zags. The calendar flips to 2025, taking a look at some resolutions. We talked about the 4 backcourt players for the Zags. We talked about the 4 frontcourt players. Now we're going to talk Coach Few. We're going to talk a little bit about some of the reserves, Emanuel Inocente and Ismaila Diani, Braden Smith even, what we want to see from them. And then we'll close it out talking about the women's basketball team as well. For Mark Few, this resolution is simple, but it is also very all-encompassing. Be willing to adapt. And I actually think Mark Few has done more adapting than he gets credit for. There have been multiple seasons where we have seen Mark Few make significant team-altering adjustments in the middle of a season that really helped catapult them to success. Last year is a great example. Mark Few was willing to make a starting lineup change in mid-January, which he's historically been resistant to do, bringing Ben Gregg into the starting lineup and starting 3 bigs, which he's very resistant to do, while bringing freshman Dusty Stromer off the bench. It immediately turned Gonzaga's season around. That gets so much praise and attention, but outside of that, Gonzaga also made a subtle change where they started running their pick and roll actions a little closer to the basket because teams were going under on the screens and forcing Ryan Nembhard to shoot threes. Nembhard shot 15% from 3 in the first half of last season. And so the Zags said, let's run that pick and roll at the free throw line. If defenders go under, Nembhard's got a 16-footer. He's going to knock that down well more than 15% of the time. If the defenders go over the screen, he continues to drive. He's good enough to thread that little pass to Graham Ike to get a lay-in that way. That was another adjustment the team made. They also ran more pick and roll actions with Nolan Hickman last year when Brian was really struggling. And those changes really helped that team find their footing and succeed going forward. So let's see some more of that this year. Specifically, I would like to see Nolan Hickman and or Khalif Battle running more ball screen actions, getting down towards the rim. If Ryan Nembhard, the team is so reliant on Nembhard doing everything offensively. And when Ryan has a bad game, and I said this on Monday's show, Ryan Nembhard is allowed to have bad games. It is going to happen. No player goes an entire season without having a single bad game. It just doesn't happen. For Ryan Nembhard to have a bad game and for Gonzaga's offense to just feel like it came cratering around them, even on a day where both Braden Huff and Graham Ike played great, For Braden Huff and Graham Ike to both have really, really above average games, and for Gonzaga to barely beat Pepperdine, sure, some of it was on the defensive end of the floor, but it is a proof that this team is so reliant on Ryan Nembhard that if he has a bad game, it doesn't even matter what else happens. This team struggles. That cannot be the case. It cannot be the case. And I'm not going to blame Ryan for having a bad game unless it continues to be a problem, obviously. But I am going to say that Coach Few needs to be willing to make adjustments, and he needs to be willing to make them quicker if it's not working. Last year, we saw them start doing that pick and roll action with Nolan Hickman. Why not do that again? Why not do it with Khalif Battle, who is such an incredible talent going to his right? Give him opportunities to do that. Have Graham come set a high ball screen. Yes, when Nembhard comes off a screen, every single player is an option to score. When Khalif Battle comes off a screen, it's probably just one player who's going to score, maybe two. I think Battle has the ability to get that pass to Graham Ike if he recognizes a pick and roll and the two defenders come at him. Maybe he doesn't. I haven't seen him do that enough to know fully. I do trust that the coaching staff has a sense of what he would do there. But even if you're just letting him run some screen actions where he's just going towards the rim, why not? Why not let him do more of that? Why not let Nolan Hickman run the pick and roll? I know he shouldn't do it all the time, but on a day Nembhard's struggling, let somebody else get a crack at it. I think this team it feels, and we talked about it with the Ajayi particularly, but it feels like there's a lot of kind of tentativeness within this offense to run everything through either Ryan or Graham or Braden when he's in the game. And I think there needs to be more willingness to improvise. And I think that starts with the coaching staff. That starts with them being willing to say, hey, if you're running that motion offense, you don't have to wait for Ryan to get back to the top before you run the pick and roll. Khalif, if you have the ball at the top, call for a screen, signal for Graham, have him come up, run a pick and roll, go to the rim, score. Like, do more of that. And I think that kind of unwillingness to, again, I don't know what conversations are happening, but it seems like there's an unwillingness to do more of that. And I think it's hurting this team. So being more willing to adapt. I think there's some defensive adaptations I'd like to see them do more of, but the focus for me is offensively, figuring out ways to not have this offense feel so bogged down by being overly reliant on the two bigs or Ryan Nembhard to get this thing going. A couple more here before we get you out and on your way in the start of 2025. This is for Emanuel Inocente, but it is the same for Braden Smith. It is the same for Ismaila Diani, and it is the same to an extent for Jun Sukyo. Be a sponge. Be a sponge. I'll focus more on Inocente. He is so good right now as a one-on-one defender. And I love that Mark Few trusts him. I love that he threw him out there on a key possession against Mo Odom and he immediately got a turnover. I love that he threw him out there on a key possession against Sebastian Mack, even though Inocente, quote unquote, committed the foul that allowed Mack to get a three-point play. Inocente got elbowed in the face and probably should have been a different call on that possession, but I digress. Mark Few is trusting Emanuel Inocente to play one-on-one defense in crucial situations for this team. But as of now, we haven't seen Inocente develop much more of his game. He hasn't got the opportunity to, and so I don't think it's a him issue. But what we want to see is him learning everything. Pepper Khalif Battle with questions. Pepper Nolan Hickman and Ryan Nembhard with questions. Learn everything you can because next year you're going to be more relied upon. I don't think Inocente is a starter and a 30-minute per game player next year, but I think he's a key rotation player. And he's asked to do more next year than just play great one-on-one defense. He was a playmaker at Tarleton State. He's a very good rebounder. He's a so-so three-point shooter. I loved when he got an open three-point look against UCLA and he knocked it down immediately. That, to me, shows a kid who has confidence in his game and is feeling like he can contribute at this level. So continue to learn, continue to grow. For Braden Smith, he should be in Ryan Nembhard's ear every single minute that he can be because he is a similar style player, and that is a player you can learn from and grow and be better and be ready to take this team to that level right away next season. Same with Diani. I don't know what his role looks like in his sophomore season because he's hurt right now, because he's so young as a true freshman. I don't think he's a big-time player next year. Granted, I thought Braden Huff would be a 3-4 year guy before he was a big-time contributor, and he was there right away. So maybe Diani will be the same situation. But again, the way to get there is to be a sponge in practice, a sponge in games, learning, watching, growing, developing, getting better in every aspect of the game. I said Yo is to an extent because he's a senior next year, so there's not as much development time left. But with so many players graduating from this roster next year, Yo is a player that I think could play more as a senior. And for him to continue to be getting better behind the scenes is what we want from him at this point. Closing out the show quickly, Zag women, the key here for them, or the resolution, get healthy, stay healthy. Finally getting healthy for this team. Lauren Whitaker still on the shelf, the star freshman from New Zealand, but the team does have Taylor Dalton back, another player from New Zealand who's a transfer from St. Mary's. Bree Sallenbien played her first game of the season as well against Pepperdine on Monday. Dalton played 18 minutes in a 21-point win. She didn't score, but she had 4 boards and a pair of assists. Sallenbien had 5 points and 1 board in just 7 minutes. Getting more depth, getting more players who are healthy and able to contribute to this team takes pressure off Yvonne Ejim. It takes pressure off the young guards, Claire O'Connor and Allie Turner. It takes pressure off the other guards, Inez Betancourt and Esther Little. It helps this team have more fresh legs, be more different ways they can attack you. It's a really, really valuable thing to have that depth back in the mix. So what we hope for this team is that now that they do have the majority of their roster healthy, that sticks, that they don't have any more injuries, and that the players who are now healthy and back in the mix continue to get their legs under them. Dalton, phenomenal player for 4 years at St. Mary's. We haven't seen her contribute like we know she's capable of yet. Sallenbien has only played 7 minutes this season. She's capable of a lot more than what we've seen so far. So I think for this team, there could be getting to a point where they start to peak at the right time, especially now that they have the majority of their roster healthy. Folks, that's going to wrap it up for me today here on the Locked On Zags podcast. I want to thank all of you so much for making the show your first listen or your first watch, not only of the day, but of the year 2025. It is sincerely appreciated to be rolling into another year with you all here on Locked On Zags. Cannot wait for the next show. We'll get you ready for that game against Portland at the Spokane Arena. We'll recap that game and get you ready for the Zags' 4th game in 7 days on the road against LMU on Saturday. Thanks again, folks, for listening. Have a fantastic New Year's Day. And as always, go Zags.